The warmth of his hands and his tender promise became the bedrock of her hopes. He vowed to lay the finest things at her feet and make her the most treasured woman alive. Her husband, with a heart full of warmth, promised to love only her. He kissed her hand gently, calling her his beloved lady. This was her fiancé, Prince Jong-un, promising to make her life the best it could be. She counted the days until they would be together, but everything ended with an unexpected twist. She, disguised as a man, was pinned against the wall in a man's embrace. The girl couldn't allow anything like this, but fate had other plans. He was flirting with her, talking about the heat between them. She was hiding her identity, but in an instant, he exposed her. He smirked and asked her why she was pretending to be a dude. She was hoping to avoid running into him like this again, but what happened 4 years ago changed everything. It was just a normal day hanging around her family's estate. She was born the youngest daughter of the Baekryun family. She had everything she could ever want, but even her own brothers didn't respect her. She tried to win her family's affection, but it was all for nothing. Because of her less than noble background, they treated her like dirt. That's what happens when you're the illegitimate child of a servant. Then, one day, her father announced she'd received a marriage proposal. She was ready to bolt when she heard Prince Jong-un was supposed to be her groom. The prince had a nasty rep, but Dad wasn't taking any arguments. He was down on her poor blood, said that's why she'd talk back to her father. She braced herself to accept her fate, knowing she didn't have a leg to stand on. Word was the prince was a real party animal, didn't care who he hooked up with. Her heart sank every time she thought about being with a guy like that. Still, she didn't get a say in the matter. That was her life, always under someone else's thumb, and now she was walking down the aisle. She saw her future husband's face for the first time. He greeted her with a sweet smile, like he was trying to reel her in. The prince looked so damn gorgeous. She suddenly wondered if all those rumors were BS. She'd never seen anyone move with such grace before. Contrary to the rumors, he was actually pretty kind and gentle. From the start, he treated her like she was the most important person to him. After they got engaged, her family's attitude totally flipped. Even her usually jerky brother shut his mouth, not daring to disrespect the prince's fiancé. Even though her fiancé had a reputation, her social standing still skyrocketed. She held on to the hope that he'd rescue her and get her out of that house. Strolling through the flower garden, lost in memories of him, brought her so much joy. She sent letters with flowers, hoping they could meet up in the spring. The bride clutched the letter to her chest, eagerly awaiting that day. His kindness made her wonder if the rumors were just made up. And so her days went by until tragedy struck. One quiet night, the Baekryun estate was burned to the ground, no mercy given. The imperial army wiped out the entire family, suspected of plotting against the ruler. They were ready to snuff out the life of every single family member they could find. The girl had no idea what her father had gotten himself into. She fled the estate with everything she had, and was the only one to make it out. The girl ran as fast as she could because her life was on the line. She dreamed of leaving these cursed walls, but never thought her life would end up like this. She took one last look at the palace and turned away. The thought that she could only be free now was just laughable to her. Just the thought of her fiancé brought tears to her eyes. The idea that she'd lost everything was agonizing. Months passed, and she managed to disappear into the marketplace. She disguised herself as a man, working for an old merchant. The girl happily did her job at the clothing store. The other merchants kept wondering why a young guy like him wasn't chasing after girls. She just sighed, figuring this was better than being a lone woman. As soon as the young master showed up, everyone started whispering. The girl, now called Dan, overheard that this guy visits the *mile* every day. Everyone figured he was either some government guy or a rich kid. But nobody had a clue about where he really came from. Dan smirked, reminding the woman she was there to buy fabric. Meanwhile, the aristocrat just glided down the street like a swan. Evening came, and they asked her to go to the pleasure house. She didn't want to go, but the old man demanded she deliver the cloth. She steeled herself and walked on, not wanting to visit that den of iniquity. A lavish palace, decked out in lights, stood before her. Guards greeted her at the entrance, checking everyone who came in. She tapped the guy on the shoulder when he asked where to drop off the fabric. This girl was loving life pretending to be a dude, otherwise she'd be totally defenseless. She could just chill and earn a living without the hassle. A whole new world of freedom opened up like a dream come true. Every time she worried she'd wake up back in the Baekryun house. No sooner did she think about her fiancé than someone showed up behind her. It was that guy, the one she couldn't stop thinking about. Now he was just a pipe dream, a reminder of what used to be. Her jaw dropped when she realized it was Jong-un. Even though she was living a different life now, this ghost from the past wouldn't let her go. She accidentally dropped a bolt of fabric, and it smacked him right in the head. Dan froze, the reality of what she'd just done to the prince crashing down on her. She scrambled back, tripping over herself to apologize for her blunder. To her shock, a sly smirk was all that bloomed on his face. He called her a commoner who dared to touch such a prized body, then asked her name. Dan bowed deeply, begging forgiveness again for her transgression. She thought she was done for, but he just ordered her to raise her head. He grabbed her chin and asked if it was really possible she didn't know who he was. She started to panic, wondering if he recognized her and guessed he was some nobleman's son. The man bitterly looked away from that pathetic lie. He decided to play along, touching her and remarking that she smelled awfully fragrant for a guy. She told him to back off, but he pointed out this was a place people came to find comfort in other people's arms. She immediately called herself a servant and said she wasn't into that kind of thing. The prince just added that now she had to pay for her mistake. She felt a glimmer of hope when she saw her acquaintance, Ju Hae. The courtesan quickly reminded her that they desperately needed fabric. She became their savior, pointing out an empty room to the master. Dan breathed a sigh of relief, but the prince wasn't about to let her go. He smiled again and declared that he would be seeing her soon. As soon as the doors closed, she looked back, terrified. She snatched the fabric and bolted from the palace. She knew his coronation was happening any minute. Everyone assumed the second prince would take the throne because of his wild behavior. She froze, not believing she'd run into the man she missed even in her dreams. Memories of their wedding ceremony flooded back. She couldn't believe that sweet guy could be such a, let's just say, a real piece of work. They were supposed to be married, but she was done with that. She wanted to escape, but what she saw made her tense up. Dan realized everyone entering was being thoroughly checked. The guards were demanding ID, which she didn't have. She knew there was no way she'd pass inspection, not while she was on the run. The guard spotted her and told her she needed to get checked out before leaving. In that instant, she felt completely and utterly doomed. Realizing her situation, she bolted right back into the Maval. Now she just had to wait until morning to make her escape. Resigned to that, she wearily opened the door to her bedroom. She couldn't believe her eyes when she saw the prince inside. The guy smirked, figuring out she'd tried to make a break for it. Dan froze, realizing she'd walked right into a trap. Accepting what was coming, she confidently stepped forward. She tried to find out why he was there, but he just ordered her to sit next to him. The girl frowned, realizing she was being bossed around. Despite her annoyance, she still sat down across from him. She froze, looking away, but he forced her to speak. The prince studied her like a predator eyeing its prey. The girl replied that a merchant like her had nothing valuable to offer in return. The man frowned and asked if there was anyone she cared about. The girl didn't understand why he needed to know this, but she admitted she used to have someone. There was no way she wanted him to recognize her as his fiancée. The prince froze when she added that she had a relationship that shouldn't have happened. He masked his disappointment with a smile, like nothing happened. She got pissed when he asked if she had feelings for that rebel chick. Dan started denying it, but he just slid a carafe towards her. He grinned slyly and suggested they share a drink. The girl was taken aback by his sudden urge to booze it up with a common merchant. As soon as the treats hit the table, her cravings kicked in. She confidently agreed, knowing she couldn't say no. The man silently poured the sake into their cups. He shamelessly told her about the wild things he would be doing to her instead of pouring drinks right now. The girl couldn't believe he was saying such outrageous stuff. He casually asked for his cup to be filled with booze. The prince was looking at her like he was cooking up some kind of scheme. He surprised her by suddenly dumping the liquor on the floor. Dan protested, demanding an explanation for that stunt. The guy just playfully blamed it on a speck of dust in the cup. Dan's jaw dropped, but she poured him another one anyway. A minute later, the cups were sitting on the table, lit by the moonlight. The girl couldn't hide how much she was digging his looks. She was blown away by how handsome her fiancé was. She was about ready to drool just looking at his face. Looks like the guy was catching every single admiring glance his date was throwing his way. He straight up demanded she take a sip too. She did what he said, telling herself she shouldn't fall for his looks. The prince was getting a kick out of watching her drink, but he told her to hold on a sec. She looked at her moody drinking buddy, surprised again. He smirked and asked if she'd slipped something extra into his cup. She pointed out that he was the one who brought it, but he still insisted she take a sip. The prince held out the cup and told her to go for it. She figured he was throwing down the gauntlet, so she decided to drink. Making up her mind, she downed the sake in one go. Dan wiped her mouth real quick and said there wasn't any poison in it. She shut up instantly when she saw him staring so intently. It surprised her how much his cheeks flushed just looking at her. She didn't even notice him get up from his chair and move closer. Dan stared at him, surprised, feeling the warmth of his hand. He was so determined and gentle, he even leaned in towards her lips. At first, she froze, not believing this was actually happening. She closed her mouth when she felt his wet tongue. She couldn't hold back anymore when he gripped the back of her head and kissed her passionately. The girl felt like she couldn't breathe, but she was powerless to stop it. She was finally feeling what she'd dreamed of for so long. Dan responded with pleasure to his affection and passion. He leaned her back sharply and asked point blank if she was feeling the heat. She begged him to stop, but he just brazenly guided her hand to his. You know. The girl couldn't believe her ears when he said she didn't have one of those. He smirked and asked if she really thought he wouldn't figure it out. He brought up all the rumors and said he only needed one look to know who she was. The prince took off her hat and asked why she was pretending. She trembled as he started guessing the reasons. He pinned her against the wall and ordered her to confess everything. A million bad thoughts instantly flooded her brain. She thought she was gonna get iced, but all he said was she'd been through the ringer. He admitted he got her, considering how messed up the world is. His face turned all sad as he thought about how much crap she'd been dealing with. His sympathy totally caught her off guard, and her eyes started watering like crazy. She still couldn't figure out why he was being so damn nice to her. The next morning, she woke up and had to get her butt to work. At first, she didn't even remember why her head was pounding so hard. After everything that went down, she barely got any shut-eye. The prince bounced, telling her to be ready next time. The words hit her so hard she dropped to her knees. Alone at last, she let out a weary breath. She headed to the market, knowing she had to be extra careful. Dan eyed every person passing by with suspicion. The streets that once felt like home now felt dangerous. Still, a tiny part of her hoped he hadn't recognized her. She still couldn't wrap her head around the fact that he'd kissed her. Her subconscious kept throwing yesterday's memories at her. As soon as she felt her cheeks burning, she told herself to get it together. Wandering through the market, she couldn't help but wonder how many others he'd, been with asterisk. She froze when a familiar vendor called out to her. What surprised her was seeing a merchant wandering the market so early. The woman offered a fresh rice cake with a smile. Dan was happy for the treat until she saw his suspicious face. She definitely felt his eyes on her, sizing her up. Her worry grew as she realized her suspicions were right. Now she was sure of it. The stranger was tailing her. She apologized and said she had some urgent business to take care of. Dan left thinking she'd never seen that guy at the market before. She darted into an alley, trying to lose herself in the crowd. She breathed a sigh of relief as his figure disappeared. Her hope crashed when she saw his face again. Now she knew for sure. This creep was tailing her. She bolted toward the others, but he was right on her heels. The guy tried to get her to stop, but it was no use. Dan shoved past the gawkers, trying to ditch this potential threat. He begged her not to run, but she just sped up. She barely made it to her friend from the dumpling shop. Without a word, the girl grabbed a bowl, searching for a piece of dough. She decided to turn this into a weapon without hesitation. Dan spotted his mug in the crowd right away and braced herself. He tried to threaten her, implying he could make things difficult for her. He demanded she stop, but that dumpling went straight for his face, no mercy. Dan bolted, yelling over her shoulder that he'd pay for the dumpling. She smirked, stoked that she got away with it. Her victory lasted exactly until she walked right into someone's arms. It was that sleazy prince she'd been trying to forget. She suddenly realized he was the one who'd had her followed. The prince mocked him, pointing out the dumpling-induced blush. She froze, a chill running down her spine as she realized they knew each other. The prince said he assigned Yoon to her because he suspected she'd try to bolt. He wasn't interested in hearing her out and just told her to get moving. The prince explained that he wanted to pick up some fabric today. A couple of minutes later, they were at the shop where Dan worked. The old guy immediately started hyping up his merchandise to the rich dude. He proudly went on about how tough it was to get his hands on the stuff. The prince just smirked and told them to sell him everything they had. Unlike the shop owner, Dan didn't exactly look thrilled. She froze, totally shocked, when he pointed right at her. He told her to come over and explain all the different types of fabric, one by one. The prince was testing her, saying he needed to know what he was buying. The girl froze, wanting to spill everything but not leave the old man's side. He just chewed her out, telling her to do whatever the hell he wanted. The guy smirked like he'd won when she said she understood. She started explaining the fabric's origins, step by step. Dan closed her eyes, going on and on about how great the stuff was to the prince. He listened to every single word, his eyes burning right through her. Out of nowhere, he pulled her onto his lap, saying he couldn't hear her well. The girl was stunned that he didn't give a damn who was watching. She tried to object, but by then, the old man had already been taken somewhere else. Dan demanded he let her go, but he wasn't about to lose his prize. The prince just shoved a berry in her mouth and told her she was being loud. He smirked as she froze, tasting the delicious berry. The guy added that she shouldn't worry, he wouldn't lay a finger on her. She just scoffed inwardly, thinking about how he was touching her right now. Dan said she understood and asked him to let her go, but he didn't want to. He changed the subject and asked why she was so skinny. The prince deliberately and oh so carefully fed her fruit she didn't even want. He smiled and compared her to a little baby bird, eating with its mouth wide open. She was outraged, but also flustered by all the attention. The second she glanced at his lips, their kiss flashed back in her mind. He definitely caught the way her face suddenly went bright red. He smirked, figuring she was remembering what went down last night. She tried to play it cool, like nothing happened, but that just egged him on. In a heartbeat, he pinned her against the wooden platform and told her he'd refresh her memory. Then he swept her away inside, quick as lightning. Dan didn't even realize how she ended up on the bed with the prince on top of her. He thoughtfully stroked her hair, figuring out how to jog her memory. Dan bit her lip, trying to stay strong, when his teeth grazed her neck. She tilted her head back, feeling his tongue trace a path across her skin. He explored her mouth with his tongue until he reached her lips. The prince pulled back, asking if that helped jog her memory. He suddenly spread her legs, suggesting they do something inappropriate. Only then did she confess that she remembered everything. She turned away, flustered, and said it was just a kiss. His ego took a hit when she said she'd kissed plenty of guys before. He got pissed and instantly pulled her onto his lap. The prince said that with all her experience, this position shouldn't faze her. Dan clearly understood he was openly toying with her. Still, she didn't understand why she was playing along so stupidly. She couldn't hold his emerald gaze and return the kiss. They froze in the middle of the room, feeling the heat rising between them. He was toying with her, like a sly fox looking for a payday. The prince pulled her close by the head and kissed her even more desperately. Her mind was racing, wondering if he even remembered his fiancé. She wanted to confess everything, but she couldn't let herself. From now on, she didn't want him to know she ever loved him. They stood locked together until a courtesan knocked on the door. The girl recoiled, hearing the question about whether she was inside. Dan met his triumphant gaze again and froze. She shoved him away, trying to shake off whatever the hell that was. It was like a bucket of ice water had just been dumped on her. She saw the look on his face and knew he was just messing with her. So she was totally caught off guard when he pulled her in even tighter. The guy just straight up asked her why Zoe had come to see her. Meanwhile, the girl kept calling out for her friend. Zoe was Ju-hee, Kisang from the pleasure house. He got all possessive, asking what was going on between them. The girl figured they were getting too close and pulled away. She tucked her hair back, feeling her mood completely tank. Dan greeted her friend and told her to come on in. The girl got flustered when she was asked why she was visiting. She started to speak, but was surprised to see that powerful dude. He stood up and said he just dropped by because he was bored. He added that he and Dan had become buddies a couple of days ago. The prince left the room, saying he'd see them around. He left them both stunned and closed the door behind him. Kisang immediately grilled her about how they even met. The girl scratched the back of her head, looking thoughtful, and said it was a long story. Ju-hee wanted to warn her to be careful, but stopped herself. She got flustered and said she came to tell her something. Kisang studied her face, bracing herself for a confession. She smiled and asked her to marry her, saying she really liked Dan. The girl couldn't believe what she was hearing and froze. Kisang said she had a chance to leave this place and asked her to run away with her. Dan started to protest, but Kisang asked if she was worried because she was a girl. She smiled and added that she saw right through her act. She didn't care if she was a guy or a girl, she just liked her for who she was inside. She leaned in close, wanting to live happily together. Her feelings were real, but they couldn't be returned. Dan apologized, saying she couldn't reciprocate her feelings. She was quick to add that it wasn't because she was a courtesan. Dan confessed that she was still in love with someone else. She lowered her gaze guiltily and sincerely apologized again. This beautiful night became a refuge for rejected tender feelings. The courtesan left the room, accepting her defeat. She was surprised to see the prince had been waiting for her the whole time. He asked with a smile if she'd considered his offer. The man mentioned Wang Yigu, who visits her often. He added that all she had to do was pass on information she overheard from him. The emperor's down with some illness and still hasn't named his successor. Word on the street is Prince Jong-un only cares about women and booze. That definitely helps the chances of Prince Honghye, his main rival. Wang Yigu was a government official and a supporter of Prince Honghye. The courtesan replied that being a spy wasn't a problem for her. Still, she was curious about what he was really after. The prince thoughtfully repeated the courtesan's last words. She didn't know his position and thought it was just the whim of a man sowing his wild oats. He scoffed, calling them animals ready to snatch everything that belonged to him. Jong-un wanted to tear those jackals apart and wipe them off the face of the earth. After the engagement, he found out Honghye and Wang Yigu were in secret talks. They figured teaming up with the Baekryong family could be a problem for them. That's when they started cooking up their dirty schemes. Second Prince Honghye gave the order to wipe out the Baekryong clan. That's why he was so ready to get his payback on every last one of them. He didn't answer the courtesan's question, just gave a sly grin. He said he needed her help to pull it off and told her to decide right then. The girl agreed to his offer as long as the price was right. He added that all she had to do was report every move Wang Yigu made. The courtesan immediately said she had a condition. She wanted to be the one to take him out personally. The prince was totally caught off guard, but he didn't let it show. He decided to find out what was driving her to do this. The girl just said, cold as ice, that it was her own personal payback. The lord agreed, saying that all he cared about was the guy kicking the bucket. He paused, warning her to watch her step. The prince said if things went south, she'd be putting everyone else at risk too. After that, he just left the room without a word. He knew that every wrong move she made would come back to bite him as well. The freezing night was quickly replaced by a sunny morning. As usual, Young-eun headed to the market where the girl was. Yoon used to try and find her, searching every village, but it was all for nothing. Turns out she was right under his nose the whole time. Yoon apologized for not even considering that possibility. The prince was lost in memories of that night. The fear he felt for the woman he loved left a deep scar on his heart. She was hiding, terrified for her life. Hua Young tried to escape, but the soldiers spotted a strand of her hair. They charged after her, determined to take her out. Only a sliver of moonlight lit her desperate path to safety. She ran, feeling like her heart was about to beat right out of her chest. Every time he got the order to chase her, the adrenaline spiked harder. A whole dozen guys were running after her, following orders. What saved her was some unknown dude taking one of them out. He dropped like a sack of potatoes, showing off the guy who did it. The other servants froze, scared stiff of who they were looking at. Standing right in front of them was Prince Jong-un himself. He turned to Yun and told him to go after Hui Yong. The guys demanded he let them through. They accused him of trying to start a whole thing and cover for traitors. The prince just drew his sword and gave the loudmouth a taste of it. The prince gripped his blade tighter, saying he wouldn't let anyone get away. He braced for the attack, promising that no one would ever hear about this. His words caught the rage-fueled guards completely off guard. One of them barked an order to stand firm, boasting that the prince was no match for their skill. They charged, hungry for his blood, completely oblivious to their own impending doom. Prince Cheon-woon didn't say a word, just steeled himself. Before you knew it, those guys had all checked out. He stared down at their lifeless bodies, cold as ice. What the guards had said only confirmed that they'd be coming for his throne soon. He knew a palace coup was brewing. He was lost in thought about that night, chewing on his lip. The prince felt a heavy guilt about what happened to the Baekryong family. He knew he shouldn't have condemned that girl to such hardship. Yoon watched his brother anxiously, seeing how much he was struggling. He stepped forward, determined, and declared he wouldn't lose his woman this time. He saw her as his destined bride, the one fate had tried to keep from him. She was about to mention closing the shop, but was surprised to see him. He smiled and asked if she was giving up on selling things now. She awkwardly replied that for him, even open doors would swing wide open. The man froze, then said he was here to sell today, not to buy. He swore he wouldn't just be infatuated, but completely devote himself to her. The prince leaned in and promised her he'd be all hers tonight. She tried to avoid spending the night with him, but he didn't give her a chance. She wasn't even sure if she still wanted to get away from him. Dan felt like it was getting harder and harder to resist him. All this time she'd been missing her beloved fiancé. He reached out his hands and told her she could embrace him if she wanted. She braced herself to hug him, only fueling his feelings even more. They felt intense emotions, sharing the same thoughts. Their lips met, longing to live in those memories. As the sun dipped low, they entered the palace where the prince resided. She found herself in his chambers, ready to yield to his desires. He yearned for them to be completely consumed by one another. He gently removed her work shirt, savoring the sight of her. She shyly covered her chest, already constricted as it was. The prince took her hand, wanting a closer look. Sadly, he wondered if she had always kept herself so hidden away. He tenderly kissed the part of her body she kept concealed. The prince stepped back and prepared to reveal himself. He showed off his toned physique and wondered if she felt awkward. The next second, he froze above her, ready to pull her close. He unwrapped the bandages, his eyes wide as he took in her delicate form. She trembled as she felt his heated touch. His hand quickly moved lower. He figured she knew the score, understood what happens between a man and a woman. The prince was laying out exactly what he planned to do, no holds barred. He pulled down her pants, not mincing words about it. The man smirked, then told her to open her legs. Hui Young had always been taught that the wedding night should be modest. She wasn't supposed to scream or say anything inappropriate. Still, Young-eun was breaking down all her reservations. She begged him to stop, but he kept going. With every move he made, she felt like she was losing control. Young-eun was totally focused on her reactions. He squeezed her hand and asked why she was holding back. She said it was all wrong and she wasn't supposed to act like this. He told her not to worry about him judging her or anything like that. He wanted to keep going, but she pushed him away. She tried to get away, saying she needed to use the restroom. Even so, he just kept right on going. She tried to stifle the sounds, but her body started shaking uncontrollably. It wasn't a minute before he pushed her right to the edge. He held out his hand, showing her the moisture. The girl wanted the ground to swallow her whole from the embarrassment. She pounded on him with her fists, reminding him she told him to stop. The prince just reached for his pants and said he got a glimpse of her sweet side. He leaned over her, telling her it would all be over quick. The girl couldn't hide her surprise when she saw what he was packing. She wondered if she'd even survive this, but he just told her to chill out. The second he felt her tense up, he wondered if this was gonna be as easy as he thought. The guy leaned in even closer, really turning up the heat. She froze, totally stunned that this was actually happening between them. He kept teasing her, trying to get her to spill all her fantasies. She caught her breath and said it was better to just get it over with. The prince smiled softly, seeing how ready she was. Her eyes widened as she felt them getting closer and closer. He lifted her legs, wanting to clear the way. It hurt, but the passion was clouding her mind. Deep down, she was actually enjoying these weird sensations. She eagerly returned every single kiss. Her hands tightened around his neck like she was afraid of losing it. The guy let out a strained breath, feeling something new. It was time for him to make a move. He paused, letting her get used to it. I think even she was surprised things went down like that. She thought they were done, but he repositioned her legs. He smirked and reminded her about his naughty promise. She bit her finger when she felt his heat again. And that's how they spent the whole night wrapped in each other's arms. The exhausted girl opened her eyes to the gentle rays of the sun. She groggily came to, feeling like her whole body was made of lead. A man's hand was gently holding her as she slept. Looks like he noticed she was waking up and wanted to know if she slept well. He was acting like nothing happened last night. That sly grin of his made her blush and hide under the covers. Yesterday's memories instantly flooded her mind. He wasn't about to let up for even a second. The guy was all about letting her enjoy the moment. Her body was aching from all the sensations. Her mind was a total blank, leaving no room for anything else. He knew exactly how to set her world on fire, body and soul. Even so, he was holding her pretty tight right now. He told her they were in Hwawalchon, where he lived. At first, she didn't get who owned this place. He grinned and clarified that this was his estate near Chongpeng Lake. She froze when his hand suddenly moved higher. She was clueless about what had gotten into him this morning. He reached in and asked why things were so quiet down there. Hua Young protested, sensing where this was going. She suddenly remembered she had work waiting for her at the shop. The girl was about to leave, but he told her not to worry. He grinned and said he'd already given the old man a heads up. She wanted to say this was wrong, but he gently kissed her shoulder. Hui Young was trying to think about customers, but he was taking over her thoughts. She told him to stop when he confessed he'd been occupied with her all night. The girl cried out that her whole body was already so exhausted. He said it wouldn't happen again, but she didn't believe that line. It seemed like her protests were just turning him on even more. He sat her on his lap and told her to take the reins. It was too much for her, considering how she was raised. He kept pushing her to do it, though. She sighed, exhausted, the moment she felt his hands on her again. Hua Young froze when he sped things up. It was over so fast, she barely had time to react. Her eyes darted around when he confirmed she was already there. She hesitantly reached out, not believing she had to go through with this. He looked her in the eye and said he couldn't hold back any longer. A heavy breath escaped her as she felt his warmth again. She was surprised when he laid her back on the pillows and loomed over her. The prince just called her slow and said he couldn't wait. Hui Young couldn't believe what a total scumbag he was. A few more hours passed, and she felt like she was dying. She even lost track of the days she spent with him. He was all over her night and day, no matter the time. The prince showed up with a tray and told her she needed to eat. He sat her up on the bed in a flash, like she was some little animal. Young Woon held out the chopsticks, but her hands were shaking. She tried to reach for the food, but her whole body was trembling like crazy. Before she knew it, the chopsticks slipped right out of her hands. She said, exhausted, that she just didn't have any strength left. The guy smirked and said he'd personally feed her. She reluctantly opened her mouth, blaming him for how she felt. He asked if she liked the food, and she nodded. The second she mentioned not liking meat, he called her skinny. He put his arm around her and said she was so fragile, like she could break any second. He quickly laid her down on the bed and told her it was time for a nap. She started worrying about the shop again, but he'd already taken care of everything. Even though she was exhausted, she still felt like she owed him. Meanwhile, Yoon was covering for her at the shop. Hearing that, she finally agreed to get some shut-eye. Jung-un smiled softly, watching the girl sleep. He loved seeing her in all her different moods. He He gently stroked her hair, feeling a warmth bloom in his chest. He leaned down and kissed her softly on the forehead. He liked calling her his mistress in his head, even if he never said it out loud. After a while, he arrived at Yangchunjong Palace. Once again, he gazed at his father's body, ravaged by illness. Nobody around here held out much hope for his recovery anymore. The Empress said she wasn't seeing any improvement in his health. Empress Kumyul kept saying how much she wanted him to get better soon. Young-un bowed and said he'd be going now that he'd had a chance to meet with her. He could sense bad vibes coming from this woman, knowing her schemes. He knew she was the one who wanted his father dead the most. She knew his father could put him, not her son Hong-hee, on the throne as crown prince. He had a feeling one of them would be coming for him when the time was right. Young-un was strolling through the palace when he ran into his brother. You could feel the unspoken rivalry between them, fighting for their place in the world. The guy greeted his older brother with a cocky smirk. Young-un didn't react to the disrespect and just smiled back. His servant tried to demand Hong-hye get out of the palanquin, but he stopped him. Young-un explained that his brother was just a little kid. The second prince frowned, thinking his older brother was a stuck-up jerk. Still, it bugged him that a servant dared to order him around. He figured Young-un was just a pretty face with nothing behind it. The first prince said he'd come to check on their father. Hong-hye shot back that his reckless behavior was why their father couldn't trust him with the throne. He called him out for letting his own place fall into disrepair. His words didn't faze the cunning first prince one bit. He decided to put some pressure on his brother who was so sure of himself. He stepped closer and reminded him how fast gossip spreads inside the palace walls. The first prince implied he had some *** performance issues, hinting at why he doesn't have any kids. He offered some advice, acting like he was some kind of stud. The guy gave the palanquin a cocky rap and told him to reach out. And just like that, he left his brother shaking with humiliation and rage. Looks like he hit him right where it hurts and came out on top. Hong-hye swore he'd rip his tongue out the second he took the throne. Meanwhile, Dan finally got back to work at the fabric shop. She was back to hyping up the material, listing all its great qualities. The women she knew noticed she was acting kinda off today. She went back to the storage room, saying she was gonna grab some other fabrics. Even though it's been half a month, she still felt empty inside. Prince Jong-un vanished like he never existed. From now on, it felt like everything that happened was just a dream. She decided there was no point in hoping he'd ever be hers. The lady said she wanted to treat her to a huge fabric haul. She added she'd be gone for a while because of a disagreement with her husband. Dan bowed and bid farewell to the wealthy woman. She turned around as the elder approached her. He shocked her by ordering her to go back to Myeolwal. The old man scolded her for the displeasure showing on her face. Some guys were dreaming about hitting up a Myeolwal, but his coworker was turning up her nose. Dan told him to go by himself, but that just pissed him off even more. The old dude sulked, saying she was just waiting for him to kick the bucket. After that kind of guilt trip, she had no choice but to do what he asked. That same night, she found herself in a place where guys' fantasies come true. Beautiful Kisang were charming the socks off the attentive men. Only Juhye sat quietly, embracing her role as a spy. Her companion held out his empty cup, ordering her to fill it. Official Wang Yigu was giving her the eye, wanting her to wait on him hand and foot. He said he never got a chance to drink in peace and quiet. The girl smiled, promising he'd leave in a good mood. He smirked and said that was a stone-cold guarantee. That second official was really working the room, spreading the cheer. Wang Yigu agreed, saying all the preparations were complete and they were under solid protection. Juhye absorbed every word, determined to relay it all. She froze when the official greeted her with a sultry smile. He asked again if she wouldn't reconsider becoming his concubine. He promised she'd live like royalty, but she wasn't biting. She thanked him for the offer and said she was happy where she was. She added that if he really wanted her, he'd have to win her over first. The guy chuckled, called her sassy and undiscriminating. He pulled her close, saying she had a real attitude problem. The girl clenched her fists, trying to keep from throwing up. She stood up, saying she'd be right back, just stepping onto the balcony. The girl calmly headed forward, getting away from the room. She was disgusted by the idea of him trying to, claim her. This guy was getting on her nerves, but her freedom was on the line. She couldn't believe he didn't even recognize his own daughter. Her mom, being a certain kind of entertainer got pregnant by Wang Yigu. When he found out, he just laughed, saying she couldn't prove a thing. He ditched her, leaving her to raise the kid alone. She wanted to bite her tongue off right then and there. She was so pissed. Juhye kept telling herself to just hang in there a little longer. She froze when the prince's nervous attendant suddenly appeared behind her. He asked, all concerned, if she was all right. She asked what he was doing here and then found out her client was around. It was the prince who promised her freedom in exchange for spying. He turned around, realizing she was standing behind him. The courtesan slowly approached, ready to spill everything she knew. Jong-un stayed put, not wanting to blow his cover. He told her to come closer, like they were some high roller and his hostess. The girl lowered her head respectfully and moved in. She gently touched his sleeve and leaned in close to his ear. The hostess started spilling all the tea she'd gathered. They didn't even notice Dan creeping up on them. The girl was so shocked, she almost dropped the package she was holding. She figured he was stepping out on her and realized he'd always been that kind of guy. Dan saw the look on his face and felt totally betrayed. She knew it was possible, but it still ripped her apart inside. She immediately caught the eye of a worker passing by. He immediately followed the merchant's gaze. The guy saw Ju-hee and figured out what the deal was. He smirked and whispered, asking if she was jealous. The dude just assumed she was into Ju-hee, which was way off. He mentioned that this gentleman had been visiting Ju-hee for days now. The worker snatched the package, saying he'd drop it off on his way. He offered his support, saying she'd get over this heartache. And so she was left alone, all messed up by her own assumptions. The worker's words kept replaying in her head. She tried to keep all the bad vibes from bubbling over. Dan jumped, startled, when Yoon suddenly appeared behind her. He explained he'd been waiting on the porch the whole time. He wanted to know what she was up to, but the prince spotted her. The guy just casually asked what she was doing out here. She shot him a death glare and didn't say a word. The guy just smirked, calling it interesting. He grabbed her chin and asked why she was looking at him like that. Yoon quickly backed off, realizing where this was going. Prince Jong-un kept demanding an answer, but she stayed silent. She brushed his hand away and threw his own words back at him. The next thing he knew, she silently touched his chest. She remembered him saying to embrace him so he'd give himself to her completely. Just hours ago, she wanted to forget him, but her tongue wouldn't cooperate. She asked him point blank if he would give himself to her now. The prince was stunned by her fierce desire to possess him. Shaking himself out of it, he gently squeezed her hand. He leaned in and said he'd gladly let her. Before you knew it, they burst into an empty room. An overwhelming, primal passion surged through their veins again. Their mouths locked in a heated, sensual kiss. Without a second thought, the prince ripped open her coat. He pulled her close, saying it was all over now. Jong-un touched her stomach, saying the marks he left were gone. In a flash, he tied her wrists to the bed. Only now did she notice that crucial detail. The girl was shocked to realize she couldn't move freely. She asked why he'd tied her up, but he just smirked. He flat out asked if she knew what this room was for. He added that he made it specifically to, entertain ladies who are tied up. It finally dawned on her why there were so many ribbons on the bed. Dan suddenly had this thought that he probably wouldn't be the most faithful husband. People had told her before to just look the other way when it came to her husband's mistresses, but she was seething with anger. She closed her eyes, just thinking about how many women he'd been with. He froze when she told him to cut it out, to stop right there. Dan figured he must be getting tired of doing this for like the 100th time. She definitely didn't want to be just another girl in this room. To her surprise, he said that he'd never actually taken advantage of her. He confessed he'd only dressed her up to fuel the rumors about him. The prince added that she'd probably already heard them. He smirked and said that there wasn't a shred of truth to any of it. She was about to ask something, but the quill slipped down onto her undergarments. He remembered her earlier complaint and said he wouldn't do that asterisk again. He twirled the quill and said he'd never tried this asterisk before. Soon, there was no room left in her mind for all those thoughts. She was melting under his touch and begged him to at least untie her hands. Dan reasoned that she couldn't even hug him like this. Those words sounded so tempting that he just couldn't refuse. He untied her and said she had a real knack for bringing out his wild side. After that, he really started to get down to business. He couldn't hold back any longer and pounced on her like a predator. She tried to tell him she was hurting, but he didn't stop. He smirked and asked her to point out exactly where it hurt. The prince pressed closer and kept going. True to his fiery nature, he kept her on edge till morning. As soon as she woke up, he thoughtfully handed her clothes. He was ready to leave and said he had a great time. The prince walked coolly to the exit and told her to get home safe. Last night, she was on cloud 9, but now he'd totally iced her out. She pulled herself together and trudged sadly to the shop. The prince watched her tired walk with a heavy heart. Yoon asked if he should follow her, but Jong-un refused. The prince knew that if anyone noticed his infatuation, she'd be in danger. He racked his brain, trying to figure out how to protect her. A power struggle was coming soon, one where he could lose everything. He turned to Yoon and said he had an idea brewing. Meanwhile, Dan was already catching flack from the foreman. The guy was pissed, saying the shop should have been open since this morning. He was surprised when she just sadly shuffled past him. The girl apologized and kept on walking. She reluctantly got back to her usual chores. The girl propped her chin on her broom, letting out a thoughtful sigh. All she could think about was whether they'd ever see each other again. She was starting to feel like she was being a real pest, always bothering him. She jumped when she heard a familiar voice behind her. The guy announced they were neighbors now, 'cause he bought the shop. The girl was so shocked, she straight up dropped her broom. She froze, wondering if she was just dreaming the whole thing. He just casually said he was getting a little bored, that's all. Her mind started racing when he said he'd have to think about the merchandise. He leaned in close and asked if she was letting her imagination run wild. The prince saw the broom and asked if she was gonna whack him again. He was laying it on thick, saying the pain still hadn't gone away. Dan paused, then asked, not really believing him if he was seriously gonna run the store. He just said she'd end up doing all the work anyway. The guy just tossed out, like he couldn't care less, that she should keep selling fabric. And so began another day at work, one that would be a real eye-opener. Tourists were buzzing all over the market, hunting for stuff to buy. The girl was smoothly talking up their newest, rarest fabric. She was a killer salesperson, really bringing in the dough. Dan was a pro at matching the right fabric to whatever people needed. Prince Jong-un watched her work, cool as a cucumber. What really got his attention was that smile she was handing out to everyone. The girl was super nice and welcoming to all the customers. He walked up and told her she was a natural at this. The girl turned around without a word, hearing that loaded comment. He doubled down, saying how good she was at buttering up the big spenders. Before she could even answer, he cut her off, asking why she wasn't buttering him up. Dan replied calmly that she had no idea what he was talking about. It blew her mind how easily he could get his feathers ruffled. She asked him why he wasn't paying attention to the business he'd just bought. The dude just shrugged and said he hadn't decided what he was gonna sell yet. Dan just sighed at his lack of responsibility and glanced up at the roof. She could see they were living in completely different worlds. His dreamy smile totally gave away how high he was flying. He's some kind of noble prince, while she's just a worker in a crummy market. And even her low-rent status was on the line. She froze when he told her to come closer. The prince all gently held out a rice cake, ordering her to eat it. She carefully checked out the snack and was totally surprised. The guy just said, all bored, that he didn't want to waste it. She swallowed her annoyance and thanked him for it. Dan ignored his jab and took a bite. She sat down next to the prince, sharing the meal. The whole time, she kept glancing at the guy. She felt calm and answered his usual questions. He asked if she was eating well and how much she was getting paid. She was getting tired of the questions, especially when he asked if anyone was bothering her. Dan jumped up when a girl at the end of the street called her name. She bolted, leaving her pastry on the bench. For some reason that stung the prince, left him feeling kinda sour. He glanced down at the barely touched pastry. The prince shot a quick look at the girl. He saw how happily she was helping a young customer. His irritation grew when the customer touched the shopkeeper. One simple gesture was enough to set him off. Night fell, and the girl was still stuck in the shop. The prince was breathing down her neck, asking when she'd be done. He smirked, saying he wanted to buy some fabric from her. Jong-un thoughtfully examined the fabric, trying to pick something out. The girl pulled out a roll, suggesting it would look good against his crimson lips. She headed up the stairs to grab another option. Dan was so caught up in the moment that her foot slipped. Before she knew it, she was about to take a nasty fall. The only thing stopping her from eating concrete was the prince's hand. He caught her just in time and scooped her up in his arms. He asked her to repeat what she'd said, 'cause he didn't catch it. The way he asked was so casual, she just froze. He kept staring at her, waiting for an answer. The prince looked so damn good again, she got flustered. Before she even realized it, she was leaning in for a kiss. The prince was surprised how forward she'd suddenly become. Still, he couldn't resist and eagerly returned the kiss. She pulled away, like she was drawing him into a new game. He set her down, flustered, like he had something to confess. She didn't like him calling her Dan and kissed him again. She definitely felt him taking over her heart again. The girl pinned him to the wall, wanting to possess him again. Hua Young kissed his neck and face passionately. She was openly seducing him, hitting all the right spots. He asked what she was planning when she exposed his body. So, she mocked, mimicking the prince. What brilliant theories do you have, now? He froze as she slowly sank to her knees. Hua Young felt a little awkward, but she kept going anyway. She stopped short when a stone tool appeared in her hand. After a short pause, she parted her lips slightly. The guy stood there, waiting, watching her every move. It wasn't exactly comfortable, and her jaw was killing her, but she pushed through. She was willing to put up with a little discomfort for this. She was enjoying seeing that unusual look on his face way too much. She calmly continued until his hand reached up towards his head. He wanted to floor it, but stopped himself at the last second. The prince decided not to rush things and put his faith in her. He told her to be careful with his, After saying that, he went silent, finding his inner peace. He bit his lip when she picked up the pace a little. She drove him wild, to the point where he was begging her to stop. He had to push her away when he felt the release coming. The girl froze, seeing the substance. The prince, not holding back, grabbed her hand, pulling her close. He leaned her forward insistently, pinning her hand behind her back. The prince ripped off the girl's work clothes in a flash. He couldn't help but notice how all that affection was affecting her. The next second, he was all over her, taking her completely. It was like he wanted revenge for everything she'd done to him. His movements were so rough, tears welled up in her eyes. The prince pressed himself hard against her and stared her down. Their tongues locked again in a fiery kiss. She had to stand on her tiptoes the whole time just to reach him. She was shocked when he pinned her against the windows. Hui Young begged him to stop, but he kept going. The girl bit her lip, trying to hold it all together. She nipped at the soft skin of his neck, like she couldn't control herself. He stopped her with a gentle stroke of her cheek. The prince made her look him straight in the eye. The guy begged her not to refuse him tonight and decided to take a dip. He didn't need a break, but he decided to give the girl one. He teased her about how physically weak she was. That felt unfair, considering everything he'd been putting her through. She freaked out when he offered to help her wash. The girl told him to stop when he touched her chest. She was shocked when he said he'd already taken care of her like that before. He described in detail how thoroughly he cleaned her up after she passed out at the feast. Hui Young was ready to die of embarrassment the second his hand moved any lower. She protested when he suggested they do it all over again. She was at her limit, but his actions were leaving her with no say. She could practically feel how much he wanted her. He said with a smirk that all the marks he left had been washed away. The prince kept giving instructions, positioning her just how he wanted. Without a hint of shame, he gripped her hips, ready to get this show on the road. She froze as he completely took control of her senses. The second he started, the water in the barrel just bailed on him. The girl tried to catch her breath as he spoke to her. He flustered her, saying he couldn't see her face like this. He turned her around, demanding she face him. Getting what he wanted, he immediately got down to business. The look on his face showed he was completely lost in her. He reveled in being able to give her so much pleasure. The girl didn't want to scream and kissed him again. Meanwhile, back at the palace, the usual lazy vibes were in full swing. One of the officials was plotting another power grab. He demanded one of the Kiseng share his bed and was ready to pay big for it, but she wasn't having it. Ju Haye was totally disgusted by the guy's request. She turned him down flat, saying 1,000 gold pieces wouldn't change her mind. He went to hit her, accusing her of being stuck up after Wang Yigu complimented her. He thought she was just some cheap piece, but a strong hand stopped him. Yoon came to her rescue and told him to knock it off. The guy protested, asking who the hell he was. He looked down when the jerk openly called him a broke-ass nobody. Yoon taught him a lesson, twisting his wrist the other way. The guy rubbed his wrist in pain and said he'd tell the headmistress everything. He tucked tail and left them alone, totally humiliated. Right away, Yoon was all over her, asking if she was okay. She looked surprised, then calmly thanked him for protecting her. She wanted to know about the prince, but he said he came alone. Kiseng took off an earring and straight up asked if he was involved with Dan. Yoon froze, shocked at how perceptive she was. She saw his reaction and told him he didn't have to answer. Kiseng asked if Dan's safety was guaranteed until this whole mess at the palace blows over. She explained that Dan is a very dear friend to her. Kiseng was at a very low point after losing her mother. Dan stopped her just in time, saying that rough rope wasn't going to cut it for what she was planning. She went on about how nobody would even shed a tear when she was gone. Dan suggested she get revenge on the guy who caused all this crap. Dan's support pulled Ju-hai back from doing something she'd regret. Yoon listened to her and replied that the master really valued her. The Kiseng agreed and said the officials would be making their move soon. She begged him to protect His Highness's true identity. That very night, a message was sent to the prince by carrier pigeon. He stepped out onto the balcony and held out his arm to greet the bird. The prince noticed the note attached and quickly untied it. As soon as that bird flew off, he dove right into reading. He read through it, deep in thought, not showing a flicker of surprise. The guy just silently gazed at the moonlight, lighting up the darkness inside him. Right about then, Hui Young woke up and started wondering how much time had passed. She felt that bone-deep tiredness all over again. There he was, gently caressing her. He smiled wearily and told her to get some more sleep. His fingers softly played with her long, silky hair. The next second, he pulled his hand away, noticing something that bothered him. He realized she had started crying for some reason he couldn't figure out. The prince asked for the reason, thinking something was hurting her. She was crushed, feeling like she was just a one-night stand to him. She remembered how sweetly he'd whispered words of love and happiness to her. Now she couldn't understand how he could forget them so damn fast. She got out of bed and told him that her name wasn't Dan. She wanted to reveal who she really was, but tears welled up in her eyes again. He hung his head when she finally confessed that her name was Hui Young. She'd loved and longed for him all these years, but she still felt this bitterness. Bitter at the thought that he'd erased her name and their past from his memory. The prince suddenly said that he'd been conditioned to lose since birth. He was losing what was his, but didn't crave what he didn't have. Jung-un confessed he'd been faking it, pretending to be someone he wasn't. He'd had to hide who he really was behind a bunch of dumb labels, over and over. He added that he finally had a reason to be himself. That reason was her, even if she didn't know it. He squeezed her hand and told her he knew her real name. Those words just made her cry harder. She wanted to ask how he knew, but he just added that she knew who he really was too. Hwa-young tried to answer, but he pulled her close, holding the back of her head. There was more meaning in that embrace than they could ever say right now. Jong-un stroked her hair and told her she didn't have to say anything right now. She'd been dreaming of this moment for so long she was practically numb. He told her to call him by his name next time he came around. Then he added that if he didn't come back, she should just forget everything that happened. The battle was coming, but he couldn't tell her about it. Jong-un didn't know if he'd survive, so this was his way of warning her. He kissed her lips like it was the last time he'd ever see them. Hwa-young seemed to sense it too, silently just returning the kiss. She pulled back, staring into his deep emerald eyes. She wanted to stay with him longer, but he was already getting ready to leave. Without a word, he vanished, like he was just a damn mirage. Hwa-young froze, sitting on the bed, totally lost, trying to figure out what the hell just happened. The words he said about her just forgetting everything kept echoing in her head. Half a month went by, and the people finally got an update on the emperor's condition. They were told to keep their heads, not do anything rash, and just focus on their own lives. They also tightened up ID checks on everyone in the country, but Hwa-young only cared that Jung-woon hadn't shown his face since. When she heard a familiar rustle, she finally felt a glimmer of hope. She thought it might be him, the one she was longing for. To her disappointment, she was only met with 6 pairs of surprised eyes staring back. They froze, silently sizing each other up. For some reason, she got the feeling she'd seen these guys before. One of the men sheepishly rubbed the back of his neck and said they were the master's servants. She asked, surprised, what they were doing here. They just cheerfully replied that they were selling sweets in this little shop. It seemed fishy to her that the master's servants would be running some random stall. Getting the same canned answers, she asked where their master was. That question caught them off guard, and they shot each other a tense look. And so they just stood there in front of the girl like guilty servants. One of the men wanted to answer, but the words just wouldn't come out. Hwa-young kept staring them down like she was trying to burn holes through them. He winked, all sly, and said they had no clue where their boss was. The other guys immediately started backing up his story, lying through their teeth. She clenched her fist and said someone from the palace had come by recently. She walked up and relayed his message about the emperor's current condition. She figured it was a dicey situation for the prince, but they kept playing dumb, saying they didn't know anything. Their words made her start to doubt what they were telling her. She backed off, and then the guy said she was grilling the wrong people. He smirked, saying if they knew anything, they would have already told her everything. You should have seen their faces when they realized she was crying. The girl kept sobbing, totally wrecked by how helpless she felt. She missed him like crazy, like he was already her fiancé. It's been 4 freaking years since they got engaged, and he's vanished again. They barely got back together, and poof, he's gone, just like a freaking mirage. It sucked knowing she was stuck here alone, totally in the dark about him. The guys immediately started sweating, worried this would get back to the boss. He was trying to find the right words to calm the sad girl down. He told her they knew for a fact she had nothing to worry about. She perked up when he added that Jung-woon was eating well, sleeping soundly, and safe and sound. She lowered her gaze, just happy to hear something. Anything. Dan recovered and asked why he called the guy Madam. He immediately agreed and corrected himself. She was playing it up, saying it was offensive, and he rushed to apologize. Hwa-young breathed a sigh of relief once she got enough apologies. She looked up at the sky, hoping he'd come back in one piece. Meanwhile, back at the imperial palace, things were happening. The second prince was casually munching on imported olives. He called it a crying shame and invited the other guy to take a look down. He pointed to his brother standing next to some girl. Hong-ye said he was disgusted that he was acting so inappropriately during a time like this. He said he wanted to snuff out his whole damn family himself. Wan Yigu just laughed and said he'd already wiped them all out. He kept on cackling until Hong Hae shot him a death glare. It was like he didn't want to be pinned for that particular dirty deed. The guy said he was getting a real kick out of what was about to happen to his brother. He froze up when the Empress told him to watch his freaking mouth. She warned him about the rumors and said everything was still going according to plan. She asked the official if all the preparations were going smoothly. The Empress praised official Yigu for his hard work. Hong Hye stormed off, all butthurt, asking if she was really just gonna let that degenerate get away with it. The woman just smirked, like she was cooking up something nasty in that head of hers. She brushed off his words, saying that Jung-un was still their enemy number one. She'd already taken out 2 princes, so he was the only thing standing between him and total power. Since the 4th prince was a bastard, Jung-un was the only real threat left. Hong Hye practically begged his mom to let him deal with his brother himself. He protested when she told him that was out of the question, absolutely not happening. She said it would damage the reputation of the soon-to-be most respected man around. He didn't dare argue with his mother when things were like this, so he agreed. They'd worked so damn hard to get here, and they were so close to the finish line. The Empress was already picturing her son sitting on the throne calling the shots. She was gloating, imagining the day the world would bow down to her. That very night, assassins infiltrated Qian Wu'un's territory. One of them crept slowly towards the 1st prince's chambers. Lucky for him, he found the prince sleeping peacefully. Tonight was supposed to be the end of this whole power struggle. The Empress wanted him taken care of in the simplest way possible. Meanwhile, Hui Young accidentally dropped a teacup during the storm, which felt like a bad omen. She reached for the shards, but 3 men rushed to her side. They almost called her Milady again and said they'd be in big trouble if she got hurt. They told her she'd be helping them most by just sitting tight and doing nothing. The girl felt lost. This creeping anxiety just wouldn't let up. She stared at the men, not understanding why this feeling wouldn't leave her alone. Inside the private room, the officials were practically drooling, hyped for the upcoming fight. Wang Yigu was bragging about how the Empress herself ordered him to the palace. They raised a glass to Prince Hong Hye, saying their lives would be golden under him. Ju He soaked up every word, hoping they'd spill some secrets in their drunken stupor. One by one, they started to clear out, leaving Wang Yigu all alone. He was surprised to see the courtesan had been right there with him the whole time. He grinned, thinking she was finally ready to give him her answer. The guy couldn't believe his ears when she actually said yes. She playfully looked away and said she couldn't hide her feelings anymore. The guy happily pulled her close by the waist and said he already knew. He said he'd send someone for her as soon as this whole thing wraps up. The girl immediately gently pushed him away and said they couldn't do that. She was playing him, saying she might change her mind in the meantime. He blushed when she said they needed to seal the deal tonight. She was tempting him, openly talking about the feelings of a young woman. He justified himself, fantasizing about embracing a young woman. A minute later, they were in the room, where he pounced on her like a wild animal. The girl awkwardly said that she didn't want their first time to be like this. He agreed to drink wine with her if she'd share his bed afterward. The girl smirked, saying the way they were sitting felt more like their wedding night. The tipsy guy decided to play along and poured out the first cup. That meant they were leaving their old lives behind and starting fresh. They downed the new cup of wine in one go. Without him noticing, Ju Hye secretly spilled half her drink. Next, they were supposed to swap cups and finish the rest of the wine. She told him to be patient and started waiting for the sleeping pills to kick in. She looked into his eyes and said he had to kiss her to complete the ritual. He was dying to be with her, but his body was getting weaker. The girl watched with satisfaction as her father hit the floor. The sleeping pills worked like a charm, and he was out cold, just lying there like a baby. She disgustedly tightened her kimono and called him a vile creature. Just then, Prince Jong-un arrived, complimenting the courtesan. He smirked when she asked why he was dressed like that. The prince smiled and said he had his reasons, not mentioning the attack. Not long before, he'd been lying in his room, pretending to be asleep. He froze, waiting for the assassins to show their faces. The second the moment arrived, he snapped his eyes open, ready for anything. He shot out of bed in a flash, getting the jump on the hired killer. The guy expertly held the knife to his throat and told him to spill everything he knew. He already had a hunch who sent him, but he wanted to be absolutely sure. The mercenary protested, not believing someone like him could take him down. Calling him a naive fool, Prince John-woon pressed the blade harder against his throat. He added that since the guy wasn't going to talk, he'd just borrow his clothes. In the end, he swapped clothes with the imposter and hid him, making it look like their plan worked. He smirked, noting that Wang Yigu had dug his own grave because of temptation. He ordered that the official be woken up from his sweet slumber. After he said that, Yoon slowly approached the man's face. He delivered a brutal punch to his gut, snapping him awake instantly. The guy coughed, totally lost, like he didn't know what just hit him. Yoon declared, all official, that it was time to wake up and face the music. The prince told him to back off, saying he hit hard enough to rearrange his insides. The prince knelt next to Wang Yigu, asking if he was back with the living. Looks like the dude finally snapped out of it and was shocked to see Jong-un. He couldn't believe his eyes, 'cause by now he figured he'd be pushing up daisies. The guy's eyes darted around the room, and he spotted his courtesan. He turned to the woman, not believing she had the nerve to double-cross him. The prince cut him off, telling him to quit pushing his buttons. The guy bit his lip, knowing he was in a losing game. He begged for his life and was ready to do whatever the guy said. He spilled that they were calling all the ministers together tomorrow to announce the transfer of the throne. He added that the plan was for Prince Honghye to take the throne since Jung-woon was supposed to be dead. Gu smirked and said that if he let him go, he'd do everything he could to help him become emperor. He protested when the prince turned away, saying he wasn't much help tied up like this. Jung-woon reminded him he only promised to let him live. The guy yelled, saying he'd seriously regret this. He figured he didn't have an army or any support, and he couldn't fight against the empress and Honghye. The prince froze when the guy said he'd die before even getting to sit on the throne. He agreed with what the official was saying, but he still wasn't willing to back down. The guy was taken aback when he heard that. Prince Jong-un smirked, saying he'd get the last laugh no matter what. Then he left the room, leaving the man alone with the courtesan. Wang Yigu kept begging for just one more shot. He turned to Ju Hee, calling her his one true love, saying she wouldn't let him stay like this. His words only pissed off his daughter even more. He kept buttering her up with sweet talk, just trying to get her to untie him. He offered to run away from this country together, promising to show her what a man in love could do. Totally clueless, he kept encouraging her, thinking she was about to set him free. You can imagine his shock when she glared at him with pure hatred and raised the knife. Prince Jong-un left Myeolwal as the official's piercing scream echoed behind him. Yoon turned back anxiously, listening to the enemy's cries. The prince ordered him to hurry, saying they were running out of time. Meanwhile, the official was still getting hammered by the courtesan. She mercilessly plunged a knife into his leg, making him scream in agony. He kept asking what he'd ever done to deserve this. The second he called her ungrateful, she yanked the knife right out. She repeated his words back to him, making him really hear them. The girl raised the knife again and told him to ask her mom in the afterlife. Looks like those words hit him with the force of a freight train. This is it, the morning that puts an end to a plan years in the making. The entire cabinet lined up in front of the main palace. The empress was thrown off because chief official Wang Yigu didn't show. Her son said he already sent someone to check on him. News should arrive soon. Finally, they moved forward, forcing everyone to acknowledge them. The ministers lowered their heads respectfully before the future ruler. The woman said the emperor's death could destabilize the empire, and they needed to find a replacement. She gathered them because they needed to discuss the succession to the throne. Everyone started grumbling when she came out in support of her son, Honghye. Looks like opinions are divided and doubts creeping in among the ministers. One of the guys was about to give her a piece of his mind. He said according to their laws, the throne should go to the first prince, plain and simple. He was pissed that they were trying to hand the throne to the second prince when the first was perfectly fine. It was a total violation of the damn rulebook. The woman smirked, knowing she'd already taken care of everything. She smiled and asked, "So where exactly is the first prince these days?" The empress added, "I'd be thrilled to see him on the throne, truly." No sooner did she say he wasn't around than they heard his voice. She couldn't believe her eyes when he stepped forward, men flanking him. He grinned and said, "Didn't realize you had so much faith in me." Meanwhile, Hui Young was spending her day alone and freaking out. She tried getting the guys in the shop to open up, but they wouldn't. They locked her in, knowing they couldn't spill the beans. The guys were all, "Sorry about this, really." They said they couldn't unlock the door and she should just chill out. She protested, realizing they'd been keeping tabs on her this whole time. Hui Young knew the prince was definitely in some kind of trouble. This whole situation was driving her absolutely bonkers. She threw open the windows, glad that at least something was still open. She couldn't believe her eyes when she saw what was going down outside. Guards are swarming every street, blocking all the roads. They're all heading towards the main palace, which made her blood run cold. First thing that hit her, the prince should be at the palace right now. She pounded on the door, demanding they let her out. She tried to tell them the prince was in danger, but they wouldn't open up. The girl begged them to open the damn door, feeling like she was about to collapse. She broke down, not understanding why this was happening to him. He was supposed to come back to her, so she could finally call him by his name. She suddenly remembered how they spent their last evenings together. He wrapped his arms around her from behind and asked what she was staring at. The girl blushed, catching sight of his ripped, muscular chest. He demanded an answer to his question, but she started talking about something else entirely. The prince chuckled, saying her mind was always in the gutter. The man calmly stated that the palace was visible from anywhere in the city. She was taken aback by how suddenly he brought that up. His face was a mask of disgust and loathing for that place. She decided to just come out and ask if he didn't like the palace. He put his arm around her, asking why she was so interested. He kept insisting that he had nothing to do with the palace. The girl said she loved it because it was so beautiful and extravagant. He tilted her chin up and asked what she'd do if he became her kingdom. Hui Yang called his words ridiculous, knowing she had no control over any of that. He smirked and said she could be the queen if she just took care of everyone else there. Before he could finish, she clapped her hand over his mouth, hard. She was scared, and told him not to say things that could get him in serious trouble. Flustered, she said she didn't need a kingdom, she just wanted a normal life. A small house would be enough, somewhere warm and cozy, with flowers growing in the garden. She dreamed of walking through a flower garden in a place where she was loved and wanted. She didn't care about the house itself as long as he was there. She added that she didn't need any kingdom and he shouldn't talk like that. She recoiled, and then he said he wasn't too thrilled with the palace either. He stepped closer and told her he liked her asterisk idea of a home a whole lot better. Wei Young went to say something, but he shut her up with a kiss. The guy felt that fire building again and pulled her in tight. She glanced at the busy street and started freaking out that someone would see them. The prince called her a worrywart and agreed to head back to bed. Now, thinking back on his words, she figured he didn't want to be emperor. She got visibly bummed, not understanding what he was playing at. Still, she was sure he had a reason for getting into this fight he didn't even want. She spun around when she heard her bedroom door creak open. This girl thought she'd found her prince, then froze when she realized she was dead wrong. She couldn't believe her eyes when she saw that blood-soaked hand. Standing before her was Ju-hee, looking grim and covered in blood. At first she thought Ju-hee was hurt, but she said it wasn't her blood. Hua Young immediately shot a scared look at the courtesan. The courtesan looked down, thrilled she'd finally settled things herself. She was talking about the guy who abandoned her mom, a real piece of trash. After taking care of business, she felt like a new woman. Hua Young decided not to push it and just asked if she was okay. The courtesan didn't answer, just stared at her hands again. She saw his disgusting blood, all dried up on her hands. Hui Young didn't know exactly what happened, but she definitely felt for her friend. She took care of the girl, washing the blood off her like she wanted to share her pain. There was no way she could leave her alone like that. Meanwhile, a real showdown was brewing in the palace. Young Woon fought until he took a nasty, bloody hit to his side. The Empress was gloating, 'cause things weren't going her way. She figured he was done for, and he'd be begging for mercy at her feet any second now. All the protectors he'd gathered were surrounded by a huge army. The Empress was taunting him, putting him down for the measly number of soldiers he brought. Jung-un just laughed off her conspiracy talk and smirked. He said she was the one plotting, not him, the rightful heir. The woman glanced thoughtfully at the soldiers around her. She said he wasn't fit to rule, and everyone knew it, even the kids. She gave a triumphant smile and said there was no point in listening to him anymore. The Empress ordered them all killed, and the army surged forward. She was sure that no matter how hard he tried, he was doomed to fail. She'd already taken everything that once belonged to him. The Empress saw the panic in his eyes and knew he was powerless. She savored the thought that soon this whole country would be hers. Her excitement didn't last long, not after she saw the whole crowd. A freaking horde of mercenaries walked up to them, outnumbering the Empress's army. She was positive Jung-un couldn't have gathered that many soldiers. He just coldly replied that he'd made sure she believed that. The prince smirked, meeting the Empress's furious gaze. He was loving the rage that was boiling in her veins, mixed with fear. The whole time, he'd been searching for officials who'd been pushed out of politics. They'd all been ousted and humiliated specifically by the Empress. It was tough convincing them to rebel, they were so scared. Still, he managed it, and now they were ready to fight for him. He was stoked when they said they were ready to build an empire and put the prince on the throne. The woman screamed, not believing her plan had been wrecked. She was so pissed the veins in her forehead were popping. She kept yelling at the prince for daring to screw up her long-term game. The Empress was ready to claw his smug face off herself. Before she could even move, an arrow pierced her body. That arrow, fired in secret, went straight through her heart. Prince Hong-hae screamed bloody murder, realizing he'd lost his last hope. His mother's blood, washing away in the rain, symbolized their humiliating defeat. The second prince started shaking, knowing he was next. Prince Jong-un caught his eye and said he almost forgot about him. That icy stare of his could freeze hell over. He bolted towards the palace, moving as fast as his pampered ass could carry him. He was barely managing to outrun his brother, who was packing heat. The end was closing in when he ate it hard, slamming onto the floor. He freaked even more when Jong-un, all smiles, asked where he was rushing off to. The kid stumbled back, telling him to get lost and stay the hell away. In a heartbeat, Jong-un's smile twisted into pure venom. Hong-hae said he knew it, that he'd been hiding his true colors all along. He laughed at how he'd pretended he didn't give a damn about the throne. Jung-un immediately said he wasn't really interested in the throne, which just raised more questions. The prince smirked and asked if he was asking that out of ignorance. He started listing all the messed up stuff they did, like killing his mom. They also put his girl through hell. For that alone, he was ready to make them pay for their sins. He drew his sword, shocked they even dared to mess with his relationship. His brother protested, asking if he even loved that chick from the Baekryong family. He started bluffing, asking what he even knew about her. Jung-un said he wasn't going to try and convince him of anything. Then, he made the first warning cut across his throat. That move threw him right back into the events of 15 years ago. Back then, he was standing by his mom's bed, watching her fade away. His dad always called her a peony, a flower with no scent. Jung-un almost broke down when she told him to survive, no matter what. She told him her dying wish, and then her hand just fell to the floor. Nobody came to see her until she withered away, just like a flower. Growing up, he lived with the feeling that the same fate could befall him. Compared to Hong Hae, he felt like a worthless little punk. In those days, he'd dress up in servant's clothes to sneak out of the palace. He ignored all orders and climbed the fence just to get a glimpse of her. That day, he just happened to run into a beautiful girl from the Baekryong family. She was scared stiff, but still looked like a delicate flower. He had no clue who she was or what she was doing there, but he knew he had to find out. In a flash, he walked right past her, leaving her standing there alone. That didn't stop her from catching up and mistaking him for a servant. She sadly asked him to help her, saying she was totally lost. It bugged him how she was looking at him with those puppy dog eyes, asking where the banquet hall was. He calmly answered and decided to show her before anyone spotted him. And so they walked towards the building in silence. The girl got distracted by a gorgeous flower in a vase. Jung-un thought for a second about making a run for it while she was distracted. He should have just bolted, but something made him freeze. The kid just mumbled that the flower was called a peony. The girl didn't expect him to actually answer her question, so she asked again. He didn't know what came over him, but this conversation was the start of everything. The girl happily started gushing about how beautiful the delicate flower was. The boy said darkly that it was useless and pointless, since it didn't even have a scent. He said that his father used to tell his mom she was like a peony. The girl listened intently to every word he said, like he was pouring out his soul. He added that his dad even called him a peony, comparing him to something worthless. He froze, totally lost as to why he just spilled his guts like that. Jung-un begged her to forget the whole thing, but she told him he wasn't worthless. She wasn't bothered that there was no scent, no fireworks, none of that stuff, because she just loved how beautiful he was. She took the flower out of the vase and held it up to the kid's face. Smiling, she said the peony was as beautiful as he was. He just locked up when she called him a good, kind, and sweet boy. Her face lit up with a huge smile when she told him he wasn't useless. He got flustered and started denying it all, but she wasn't budging. She said, just looking into his eyes, she could tell he was a good kid. The girl put the flower in his hands and said she was the same, so he wasn't alone anymore. Those words took root deep inside the soul of Jung-woon, a guy who felt like nobody cared about him. The girl told him to believe that the flower would find a partner, someone he could actually count on. Her words hit him so hard, with so much genuine feeling, that he started tearing up. He couldn't figure out why he was getting so emotional just from talking to a stranger. He froze up completely, didn't even get her name, and just let her walk away. It wasn't until later he found out she was the third kid in the Baekryong family. That day, he vowed he'd spread the flower's pollen and they'd meet again someday. A lot of time's passed since then, but those words have grown in his heart, like the roots of a giant tree. He thought about it even after after what happened with his brother. Jung-woon slumped to the ground, clutching his wounded side. He felt like his time was up, bleeding out like that. He turned his head when another dude showed up next to him. Jung-un smirked, remembering he'd been in the thick of the fight too. Standing right there was the fourth prince and his right-hand man, Yoon. He was stoked he'd done his duty and gotten revenge on everyone. With those thoughts, the guy braced himself to become the dust Hwa-young talked about. If he couldn't be with her, at least he could become something like that. Meanwhile, the girl was crashed out on the desk after cleaning up the courtesans, totally wiped. She rubbed her eyes, trying to figure out when she'd actually fallen asleep. The girl jumped up, surprised to see courtesan Ju-hai. Her eyes locked with the worried gaze of the silent girl. Everything went completely sideways in just one night. The empress and her son are dead, and a new prince has taken the throne. Hwa-young hurried to join the crowd to see the coffin. She was ready to throw in the towel when she heard that this prince wasn't Jung-un. The order was given to the pallbearers to lower the coffin so everyone could mourn the fallen prince. The ground disappeared beneath the girl's feet the moment she heard about Prince Jung-un's death. The prince successfully stopped the conspiracy, but he succumbed to his severe wounds. Because of that, the only surviving fourth prince ascended to the throne. It felt like even the sky was crying that day because of the loss of such a man. Hui Young's heart ached with his pain, and she wept right along with him. She couldn't take it anymore and just collapsed to the ground. All she ever wanted was to be with him, but fate screwed her over and took that away too. Time passed, but she lived every day with the pain of that loss. Ju Hye became her rock, living with her in Hwavelchon. Every day was the same for Hui Young, just a dull gray blur. Young Woon's baby growing inside her was the only thing that reminded her of those days. Ju Hye was her constant support, always taking care of her and helping her out with anything she needed. She was about to head to the palace, but froze when the girl called out to her. Hui Young asked if she'd still be her friend, even if she wasn't a Dan anymore. You could tell from her face how much this was eating her up inside. The former courtesan asked me not to insult her like that, said we were friends. Hui Young thanked her for everything, then gazed off into the distance, lost in thought. After that night, she wasn't just the daughter of a traitor anymore, and that moon pendant was his final gift. Young-eun covered his tracks completely, all so his little brother could take the throne. Only the kid she was carrying was left to remember him by. She painfully recalled him telling her to forget everything if they didn't meet again. Every single day was a struggle to forget a man like him. She woke up and fell asleep thinking about him, knowing it could never be. It felt like he was still there, stroking her hair, waking her up. Her mind replayed those gentle touches, the ones that felt like home. She longed to see his smile again, to feel that warmth. She even missed the way he used to shamelessly come on to her. Hui Young wanted to feel that passion again, the one that used to make her days so exciting. She was still asleep, but her body was already responding to a touch that wasn't even real. It all felt like a dream, a reflection of what she could never have again. Her imagination kept painting new sensual pictures. Even though he had no shame, his actions still felt familiar to her. Looks like she finally managed to wake up inside her own dream. She was shocked to see that very smile right in front of her. He asked her if she'd had some kind of nightmare. His ghost didn't know the real nightmare was life without him. He pulled her onto his lap, suggesting they play like they used to. She felt like her whole body was on fire from his sensual touch. He asked if she'd managed to forget her nightmare, but she couldn't answer. He just had to press a little harder, and she said she had. After all that, they fell into a deep sleep. When she woke up, she was surprised by her surroundings, which he called their home. He answered her questions with a silent smile. After a short silence, she looked into his eyes. The girl gently touched his face, asking if this was all just a dream. The man just closed his eyes, not saying a word. The next moment, she woke up in a cold sweat. It was like she'd been in a parallel world, where fate actually let them be together. She turned around, hearing the servants weeping for their master. This whole house was drowning in the heavy pain of loss. Everyone was consumed by grief because he left this world way too soon. For some reason, the girl couldn't cry, like he'd taken all her feelings with him. Young-eun's servant said he'd brought all her things from the shop and put them on the table. She coldly thanked the man and he just froze, stunned. He wanted to say something, but tears welled up and he had to bail. She felt his sadness and decided to check out what he'd brought. To her surprise, the basket held a tea set decorated with peonies. It was one of the few things that reminded her of her beloved. She froze, sadly examining the patterns on the tea set. It was one of the rare moments when tears threatened to spill. Memories of when they first met flooded her mind in an instant. She remembered begging him to let her go, only to fall right back into his arms. Every moment they shared, every time they were close, flashed through her mind. She remembered the first time he admitted he knew who she really was. Hui Young clutched the cups, the reality of his absence hitting her hard. He kept his promise to make her his one and only, but couldn't stick around. Those thoughts crashed down on her like an avalanche, sending her to the floor. She sobbed like a kid, feeling her heart ripped apart by the pain of losing him. She'd never be able to call his name again or feel the warmth of his strong arms. She felt like she was being punished for always running from the one she truly wanted. All this time he was searching and waiting for her, and she just kept running away. Her body shook with sobs because he wasn't hers anymore. She was ready to accept that he'd forever be in her heart until she heard a voice behind her. She was scared to turn around, afraid what she'd see would just be another trick of her mind. She just broke down even harder when she heard his voice asking why she was crying. The guy asked her why she was hiding her face, like she didn't even want to look at him. She told him she was terrified of waking up and finding him gone. She was saying how scared she was, but he turned her face to his. He smiled and reminded her how he told her to forget him if he didn't make it back. She sobbed even harder, thinking even the warmth of his hands was just a dream. He pulled her into a tight hug and said he'd never forget her, not even after he was gone. Her heart was tearing itself apart with pain and hope, like she couldn't tell what was real anymore. She clung to his chest like she was afraid he'd disappear. Wee Young looked up at him with hope when he finally said her name. He smiled and told her to call him by his name now that he was back. She did as he asked and reached up to kiss her sweetheart. Finally, after all these months apart, their hearts were one again. They kissed each other so gently, like they were afraid to let go. He told her that she had to remember him now, just like he remembered her. She didn't say a word, just kept staring at him in amazement. Jung-un promised her that his feelings for her would never change. Hwa-young bounced up and down for the first time, trying to express all the joy of being reunited. She wanted to know how it all happened, but he brushed it off with a joke. Turns out Yoon found him that day, and Jung-un asked him to call him brother, not sir. He smiled at his brother, his right-hand man, and everything. The man stared thoughtfully at his bloodied brother. He couldn't stand to see someone like him treated that way. It took a hell of a lot for him to finally call him brother. He remembered their first meeting, when he was just some unwanted kid. Yoon was born to the emperor and a slave. He came from nothing. Jung-un was the first to treat him like an equal, to show him respect. At first, Yoon didn't trust him, but the young man's kindness melted his heart. From that moment on, he felt unwavering loyalty to the guy who lifted him up. He followed the headstrong prince, placing his childhood trust in his hands. Yoon dropped to his knees, saying if he hadn't taken him in, he'd be dead already. Jung-un told him to cut it out, saying he didn't want him bowing his head to him. He floored him by saying someone so valuable deserved to be emperor. Yoon protested, saying that was impossible, but Jung-un saw things differently. Saying he'd already taken on all the sins, he asked him to just end it for him tonight. Jung-un decided to take a walk through the palace, where he was met by servants broken with grief. They were sobbing, talking about how much they suffered because of his deception. Jung-un smiled and apologized, saying he didn't have any other choice. He said he just wanted to convince everyone that he was gone. Hui-young looked tenderly at her beloved, brilliant man. The servants wiped their tears and said he was going way overboard. Turns out the coffin they were carrying was totally empty. Jung-un himself was hiding out until his wounds healed up. That same day, his right-hand man was visited by the new Emperor Yoon. He gave them his warm smile, full of loyalty. The guy bowed and asked his brother how he was feeling. He asked Hwa-young the same thing, then decided he should start calling her his sister-in-law. The girl bowed gratefully, but he told her to call him like she used to. Hwa-young apologized out of habit and called him Your Majesty again. She was mortified, remembering the time she even threw a dumpling in his face. The emperor just smiled and told her to take care of his brother. She was surprised when Jung-un, being his usual self, asked him to leave them alone. The girl immediately scolded him for being rude to the emperor, which brought a warm smile to both their faces. Juhae was watching everything unfold from a distance. She stared blankly at Yoon, remembering all the times he'd looked out for her. Looks like he felt this withdrawn girl's gaze on him. He'd had feelings for her ever since he was just a regular guy. Jung-un finally calmed his fiery wife down and noticed his gaze. Juhae decided not to interrupt their little moment and politely left the bridge. Night fell, and they could finally spend it as husband and wife. Hui-young kept on his case for being disrespectful to his majesty. Chung-un explained he was just treating him like a little brother. She pinched his cheeks, saying she thought Yoon was gonna mess up that pretty face of his. She happily squished his cheeks, turning him into a hamster. The guy replied that if she was so worried, there was one way to handle it. He nuzzled her hand and said she just needed to stick around and protect this mug all the time. Hui-young felt herself falling for this shameless guy all over again. Later in bed, she asked him about why he'd called her his wife. He told her about how they got married the first time they met, after drinking the wedding wine. In that moment, she realized why he'd poured out the wine back then. He tricked her into going through with the wedding tradition. She was blown away by how smoothly he'd played her. He reminded her that they even kissed after that. Jung-woon smirked and said they had a secret marriage, starting from that first encounter. Hwa-young was flustered, not believing he'd had her hooked from the start. He told her not to get worked up so she wouldn't upset the baby. He lovingly pressed against her stomach and told it to behave. She watched, totally charmed, as he told it not to mess with its mom or else. Hwa-young gently stroked his back and said she'd missed him. She confessed that she'd been in love with him since the moment they first met. The guy couldn't believe she'd been thinking about him all these years. She stroked his face and said she'd always love him from now on. He smiled as she kept calling him her man. Jung-un said he'd always been waiting and only ever loved her. Tears welled up in her eyes just thinking about it. She was so happy she could finally be with the one she loved more than life itself. They kissed each other tenderly, like they couldn't get enough of the moment. A few more blissful months passed after that. Now she greeted the sunlight with happiness instead of pain. She turned and saw Jung-un cradling their baby daughter. He kept chatting with her, totally clueless about the wild dream his wife was having. The days arrived when the girl could finally share all the joys of motherhood. Looks like her daughter was the first person that Ju Hye actually loved like that. She loved holding her friend's baby and calling her a little beauty. Time flew by, but every day was filled with joy for Hwa Young. She remembered how tenderly Jong-un supported her during labor. He said the little one was born healthy, and even the midwife was temporarily stunned by her crying. Hwa Young laughed and said she was so happy. After the delivery, the doctor advised them that they'd need to take it easy for a while. The girl couldn't believe her ears when he said it would be 2 months. Looks like Jung-un took the news like a champ and agreed. She was worried at first, but he was a total rock. He's been spending all his time fixing up their garden. The girl loved watching her husband work. She even found it kinda hot watching him sweat. She started having some very naughty thoughts. Hwa Young suddenly realized she should be worried about herself, not him. She froze when he took off his gloves and went to their daughter. He gently stroked her cheek, talking about how beautiful she was. Days flew by, and before they knew it, the 2-month deadline was up. She'd been waiting for this so long, new desires were swirling in her head. His gentle touches were making her face flush. He finished brushing her hair and kissed her softly on the temple. Jung-un complimented her and calmly suggested she lie down next to him. She couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. He should have been all over her by now. Hwa Young decided to take the initiative and kissed him herself. He wanted to stop his wife, but she kept clinging to his lips. Jung-un didn't want to cross the line and gently returned her kisses. The next thing she knew, he'd pushed her down on the bed, staring into her eyes. She was anticipating the big moment, but he kept putting it off. She couldn't believe her eyes when he just casually hopped into bed next to her like nothing was wrong. It was the first time in her life she'd ever felt so rejected. He was surprised when she restlessly got out of bed. She pinned him to the mattress and demanded to know why things were like this. She straight up asked him why he still wasn't in the mood, even tonight. With hurt in her eyes, Hwa Young said it had been a whole 2 months already. He was taken aback when she asked if he'd lost his, enthusiasm for that kind of thing. She started to worry that maybe she wasn't doing it for him anymore. Hwa Young asked if he was missing the women he'd been with before. He froze when she said she probably couldn't measure up to them. He stood up and asked her why she was saying such dumb stuff. Jung-un squeezed her hand and told her she was the first person he'd ever held like that. He gently touched her lips, hinting that she'd even get his first kiss. The guy kissed his wife softly, showing her how much he cared. Their tongues met, expressing the deep passion between them. She couldn't believe that she was really his first and only. He smiled and said that she was even the first person he'd ever kissed. She immediately protested, suspecting he was lying, which seemed totally unbelievable to her. The girl was stunned, but he just responded with a tender smile that spoke volumes. He held her close and said she was the only one he'd ever been intimate with. He told her to quit teasing him, because he was already having a hard time holding back. The guy confessed how terrified he was that something might happen to her. He begged her to stop tempting him, because he'd been living in fear of losing her this whole time. The girl froze, completely speechless. She saw his body trembling, showing all the pent-up anxiety he'd been carrying. As soon as she felt a twinge of pain, she recoiled. He instantly got worried, but she said it was nothing. The girl clutched her chest, which was still sore after giving birth. She was surprised how he immediately knew what was wrong. He remembered the healer warning about it, and she'd been tossing and turning all night. The healer warned that milk fat could build up in her chest. He decided to help her and gently massage the painful areas. The girl froze as his hands started moving with more intensity than before. He unbuttoned her robe and began to massage her more thoroughly. John was trying to keep it together, but those lonely nights were catching up to him. He fought to restrain himself, struggling not to give in to his desires. Even so, he couldn't resist, sampling the goods. He smirked and said that every part of her belonged to him. She called him names, but he agreed, saying it was all her fault. The moment had come when he could finally show her how he felt. Out of nowhere, he says they're definitely a match made in heaven. He took his shirt off and said she makes his blood boil just being near her. Jung-un was about to lose it from pleasure when she touched him. He'd been craving his wife's touch for so long it was written all over his face. Looks like Hwa Young was so flustered by what was happening, she even turned away. He leaned over her, all predatory, and told her to look at him. He confessed that he'd been thinking about her every night and, taking care of business himself. Jung-un went into detail about how he'd been dreaming about her this whole time. Hwa Young froze when he touched that spot. Jung-un was drinking in every breath and every look she gave him. The night had come when he could finally show her how he felt. He was a little tied up, but still wanted to make her happy. Hwa Young was surprised, not sure what he was planning. She froze, loving every second as he started to move. They kissed, sharing the sweetness of the night. Their tongues danced together, lost in the moment. She thought he'd lost interest, but this was just a new beginning for them. Jung-woon had to make do with what he had. but he wanted it all. He promised they'd see a doctor about it tomorrow. He kept pouring all his passion into her eager body. She begged him to slow down, but he just couldn't stop. She cried out as he touched her where she was most sensitive. Jung-un decided to shut her up and kissed her. And so passed their night, filled with love and pleasure. The next morning, Jung-un felt a little off. Guess he wasn't quite satisfied with last night. Ju Hye was spending a lot of time with her friend, helping her take care of the baby. Jung-un felt a little tense because they were never alone. He stomped off, annoyed, and said he wanted to plant some flowers. Turns out, that was the best stress reliever he could ask for. He stood up the second he saw the emperor surrounded by his entourage. Yoon greeted the man he owed more than his life to with a smile. He suggested the emperor's people wait beyond the bridge so they could really talk. The women gave the new emperor a warm welcome too. Yoon immediately asked how his sister-in-law was doing. He finally worked up the nerve to talk to Ju-hee, who meant a lot to him. He asked her to relax and be more casual, but she felt awkward. While Yoon was talking to her, the newlyweds were watching them interact with interest. Ju. He finally agreed to his request to drop the formalities. He blushed when he finally got to ask if she was eating well and keeping busy. Jung-un grabbed his head, reminding him he came to him for help. He decided to have a chat with his brother, using the garden as an excuse. As they walked ahead, he kept glancing at Yoon. He could see how frustrated the guy was about winning the girl's heart. Jung-un disarmed him by asking about his feelings for Ju-hye. Yoon got flustered when he realized his worries were so obvious. The guy got bummed, realizing that because of his decision, Yoon couldn't even marry who he wanted. Yoon told him not to apologize, saying that thanks to him, a pathetic guy like him had actually achieved something. Jung-un said his brother couldn't be pathetic, and he was living a really happy life. He believed that Yoon could also find his happiness and fall in love. The guy agreed with him and thanked him for saying that. His brother chimed in, saying he couldn't force Ju-hee to fall in love if she didn't want to. After that talk, he finally worked up the nerve to ask Ju-hee to go for a walk with him. He was a little flustered, figuring it was time to step up his game. Ju-hee had accepted his help before, but this kind of offer was totally new territory. Still, she agreed to take a walk with him. Jung-woon hugged his wife, who was pretty surprised by what just went down. He smugly said that he managed to get rid of 2 extra people in one shot. Hwa Young started worrying about whether her friend would have a hard time because of where she came from. Jung-woon told her not to sweat it since they could handle themselves. He kissed her shoulder and asked her to give him some attention. He barely got a moment alone with her before their daughter started giggling. He apologized for completely forgetting about her. Hwa Young turned to the man and said she wanted to ask him something. He gave his wife that familiar smile and said he was ready. No sooner had he sat down next to her than she asked why they only grew peonies. He explained that it was a precious flower, the one that brought them together. He recalled that very phrase from their childhood, when she said the flower wasn't useless. The man remembered her sweet image, frozen in his childhood memory. Looks like she's just now realizing that *** was that servant boy. He looked her dead in the eye and said he was the one all right. He repeated her line about scattering flower pollen. That day, she became his hope, the thing that led them to where they are now, together. Later, he decided to meet her dressed as a prince, but she was already gone. She told him she'd gotten a tongue lashing that day too, for wandering around the palace. He froze, totally outraged hearing she'd gotten 10 lashes from her father. Hui Young squeezed his cheeks and told him not to dwell on anything bad. She smiled and added that she didn't need a ruler who controlled the whole world. She needed the man in front of her, the one who beautifies the garden, planting peonies. Jung-un smiled softly, thanking the universe for this woman. He promised her again he'd make her happy, and confessed his love. She soaked in his words, surrounded by the sweet scent of peonies. That flower was the start of their love, blooming fully, forever without end.